The sound of snapping timber is something you feel in your teeth before you hear it in your ears. I was 3 miles out pushing my truck 70 over a gravel road that had no business seeing 40 when the wind finally died down enough for me to hear the radio dispatch. The supercell that just ripped through the valley had decapitated half the structures in the county. But I wasn't listening for the weather report. I was listening to the silence in the cab, the kind that rings when you've been alone on the road for 6 months straight. I pulled the rig onto the gravel shoulder of Mitchell Orchards. The place looked like a war zone. Apple trees were stripped bare, wet leaves plastered against the mud like green confetti. But the real tragedy was the main curing barn. It was a massive timber-framed beauty, probably 100 years old. And right now, the roof looked like a broken spine. A massive oak branch had punched through the slate and shattered the main ridge beam. The storm clouds were still dragging their bellies over the hills, but a slice of late sun had broken through, turning the wet pasture into gold. "You the guy dispatch sent?" I turned. She was sitting on an old flatbed orchard trailer, parked beside the barn, one knee up, one boot planted like she owned the world, even when it was falling apart. A faded red tractor was hitched to the tongue, steam still ghosting off its hood. She was working a length of rope through grommets on a heavy blue tarp, jaw clenched, hair loose, and wind-tossed around her face. Plaid shirt knotted at the waist over a plain white tank, jeans cuffed at the ankle, calloused hands. A woman who didn't dress to impress, but somehow still did. "Breland Foster," I said, leaning against my truck, arms crossed. I didn't offer to help yet. I wanted to read her first. "I'm the guy who fixes what God breaks." She finally looked up. Her eyes were dark, tired, and sharp as a chisel. She scanned me, my boots, the mud on my fenders, the scar on my knuckles. She didn't look impressed. She looked like she was calculating how much of a headache I was going to be. "I don't need God's mechanic," she said, voice rough from yelling over wind. "I need a carpenter who can shore up a ridge beam before the freeze hits in 10 days. Can you do it, or do I call the next number on the list?" "There is no next number," I said, walking over and taking the loose end of rope from her hands. I pulled it taut with one sharp motion, then handed it back like I was returning a weapon. "Not for this kind of timber. You hire a local handyman, that roof comes down on your head. You hire me, it stays up for another century." "Modest," she muttered, not looking away. "Accurate," I corrected, "but I'm expensive." "I have money," she shot back too fast. A lie. I could see the rust on her tractor, the patch on her jeans, the way her gaze flicked to the barn like it was a ticking clock. "I just need the roof sealed. I don't need a renovation, I don't need a partner." I looked up at the broken ridgeline, then back at her. She was shivering barely, but her jaw was set like granite. "I'll take the job," I said, "but I stay on site. I don't commute. The roads are wrecked and the county's overwhelmed. If you want this done before the freeze, I sleep on your dirt." She slid off the trailer, boots squelching in mud. She stared at me like she was deciding whether I was the lesser of two evils. "Fine," she said. 1 week. The negotiation happened in the yard, with the barn's shadow bleeding over us, and the orchard fence leaning like a drunk. Hadley Mitchell was 39 to 10 years my senior, and she looked at me like I was a reckless kid with a power tool addiction. She wasn't entirely wrong. I was 29, and I'd spent the last decade building a reputation as the best timber framer on the East Coast, just to prove I didn't need anyone. "There's a camper trailer behind the silo," she said, pointing to a vintage Airstream that looked like it had been parked since the Nixon administration. "It has power. Water's iffy. You can stay there." She held up one finger, eyes locking onto mine. "But just 1 week, that's the timeline. You fix the beam, you patch the slate, you go. I don't want you lingering. I don't want you getting comfortable." I smirked, leaning in just enough to test the perimeter. She didn't flinch. 1 week?" I asked, nodding at the structural failure behind her. "That's a 2-man job for a crew of 4. "You said you were the best," she challenged. "I am." "Then do it in 1, alone." I laughed a short, sharp bark. I grabbed my clipboard and wrote a number that was obnoxious, but fair for a miracle. I tore the page off and handed it to her. Fine. 1 week I stay in the tin can. But here's the deal, Hadley. I lowered my voice, dropping the professional veneer for a second of pure ego. Bet you will ask me to stay longer. She snatched the paper, her fingers brushing mine. Her skin was rough and warm, working hands. Don't hold your breath, Foster. A black SUV rolled up the drive like it owned the gravel. The window slid down. A man in a suit that cost more than my truck smiled like he was doing charity work. Kingsley Cox. Even from the driveway, his expensive cologne cut through the orchard, stinking of rotting apples, wet mud, diesel, and old wood. It didn't belong here. Neither did he. Hadley! Cox called out, ignoring me completely. The offer stands, especially now. You can't fix this. Hadley's shoulders went rigid. I'm handling it, Kingsley, she said, voice tight. You're drowning, he replied smoothly. The bank's going to call the note. Your insurer will drag their feet for months. Sign the deed tonight and you walk away clean. Get off my property. Cox's smile didn't move. If you don't, I make a phone call Monday. County inspector, safety violation. They'll red tag that barn, and you can't store a single apple. Then you miss the payment. Anyway, that landed. I saw it in her throat, in the way her hand found the checkbook in her back pocket like it was a life vest. Cox leaned out a little farther, too close. His voice dropped like he was speaking to a child. Be smart, sweetheart. Don't be stubborn. Hadley stepped forward, face flushing with rage. I stepped in first, not aggressive, not loud, just a quiet block of mass between her and his money. You're on private property, I said evenly, and you just threatened coercion in front of a witness. I don't know what your lawyer told you, but it wasn't this. Cox's eyes finally acknowledged me. They slid over my work boots like they were something on his carpet. And you are the guy who's going to keep that barn standing? I said. Drive. For a second, he looked like he might say something stupid. Then he rolled the window up and eased the SUV backward, tires crunching slow and deliberate, like a promise. Hadley didn't thank me. She didn't have to. She stared after him with the kind of anger that keeps a person alive. I strapped on my tool belt. The game had just changed. It wasn't just a job anymore. It was a fight. The first 48 hours were a brutal education in humility. The barn wasn't just broken, it was trying to kill me. The main ridge beam was a 12 by 12 heart pine timber, snapped clean through. To fix it, I had to jack up the entire roof structure from the inside, suspended 30 feet in the air while the wind tried to shove the building over. I was up on the scaffolding, sweat freezing on my neck, wrestling a hydraulic jack into place. It was setting in again, cold, miserable pellets of rain that made the wood slick as glass. You need a spotter? Hadley yelled from the floor. I work alone, I shouted back, wiping water from my eyes. Not on my insurance. You don't? She fired back. She didn't ask permission. She started climbing. Most owners, especially the ones struggling to pay, stay on the ground and wring their hands. Hadley climbed to the staging platform, grabbed a pry bar, and looked at me. Tell me what to do, she said. My ego wanted to tell her to get down, but the beam was slipping. I could see the stress fracture widening. Grab the strap, I barked. Wrap it around the pillar. When I crank the jack, you keep tension. Do not let it go slack, or we both end up as pancakes. She nodded. No questions. I started pumping the hydraulic arm. The wood groaned deep and terrifying, like a dying animal. The gap began to close. Hold it, I gritted out, guiding the new splice plate into position. A gust shook the whole structure. My boot slipped. I lurched backward, hand flailing for air. A hand caught the back of my belt, hard. Hadley had one arm wrapped around the upright post, the other locked on me, anchoring me to the platform. I gotcha, she said, voice tight in my ear. Reset your feet. I did, hard hammering. Her hair was plastered to her cheek, mascara smudged, eyes steady. Thanks, I muttered. Fix the roof, Foster, she said, releasing me but staying close. We worked in a rhythm for hours. I called the move. She executed the support. She anticipated needs, handing me the impact driver before I asked, shifting the work light when shadows got deep. When we climbed down, my muscles were screaming, but the ridge was braced, safe for one night. We stood on the dirt floor, breathing hard. "You're not bad," I said, wiping grease off my hands. "You're not dead," she replied, the corner of her mouth quirking. I call that a win. The friction started the next morning. I was in the trailer brewing coffee that tasted like battery acid when Hadley banged on the door. "Chutro, you're blocking the tractor path," she said without preamble. I opened the door. I was shirtless, wearing only jeans. I saw her eyes dip quick, involuntarily trace the scar on my rib cage, then snap back to my face like she'd touched a hot stove. Color climbed her neck. "Good morning to you too, sunshine." "I'm not blocking anything. I parked where you told me. The delivery truck for crates is coming at 7. Move the rig." Hadley turned on her heel and headed for the shed office like she was already late for a fight she couldn't afford to lose. I watched her go, then stepped off the trailer. The morning air had that sharp, metallic cold that crawls under a shirt. At exactly 7, a battered white box truck grumbled up the drive, suspension squeaking, tires chewing soft ground. The driver killed the engine and climbed down slow. An old local in a faded cap and a flannel jacket that had seen too many winters. He squinted at the barn, then at me. "You the roof man, Brylan," I said, stepping up to the tailgate. "You must be the crates." He gave a short laugh that turned into a cough. "Old man Miller." He jerked his chin toward the office where Hadley had disappeared. "She always this pleasant before coffee?" I hooked my fingers under the first stack and lifted. The wood smelled like sap and damp cardboard. "She's got a lot on her plate," I said, moving the crate onto the pallet, lining them square. Miller leaned against the truck like his bones were made of old fence posts. His eyes stayed on the barn. "That's the problem. She keeps stacking it higher, then gets mad the moment anybody reaches for the load." I slid the crates onto the pallet, stacking them carefully. "You know her well." Miller's mouth tightened. "I knew her daddy better." He nodded at the ridge line like it was a gravestone. "He built half of that curing barn with his own hands. When the first bad season hit, the bank came sniffing. Kingsley's people offered cash. Easy out. Her daddy wouldn't take it. Said he'd rather lose everything than hand it to men who never got their boots dirty." The next crate thudded onto the stack. "And he lost it anyway," Miller said quietly. "Piece by piece. He kept the barn, kept the land, kept the pride. Then the interest ate him alive. Hadley's been trying to keep a promise to a ghost ever since." I glanced toward the office door. Hadley was still inside. "Why tell me this?" I asked. Miller shrugged, but his eyes were steady. "Because you look like the kind of man who fixes things, and because she'll break herself before she asks for a hand. If you're here for money, take it and go. If you're here for the job." He lifted his chin toward the barn again. "Do it right. That place is the only reason she still stands up straight." I kept unloading. Faster now, more precise, like the crates were suddenly part of the repair. Hadley came back out with a clipboard. The signature already done. Eyes already back on the barn. Miller said nothing more. He just tipped his cap at me and climbed into the cab. "I'm in the middle of a glue-up." I lied. I just didn't want to put on a shirt yet. "Truck can go around. The ground is soft." "Braylon," she said, "it'll get stuck." "Move the truck." She used my first name. It sounded different when she said it. Less like a contractor, more like a problem. "Say please," I teased. Her eyes narrowed. "I am paying you a fortune to fix a barn, not to be a prima donna. Move the truck or I move it with the tractor." Then I looked closer. The dark circles under her eyes weren't makeup. They were bruises made by stress. Her hand trembled where it gripped the doorframe. She wasn't flirting. She was terrified of losing everything. My arrogance evaporated. "I'll move it," I said, voice dropping the playful edge. "Give me 2 minutes." I pulled on a thermal shirt and boots, moved the rig, then walked straight to where she was trying to unload a pallet of empty apple crates alone. I grabbed the stack she was fighting with and hoisted it like it weighed nothing. "I didn't ask for help," she said, stiffening. "I know," I said, stacking the crates perfectly in the shed. "That's why I'm doing it." Quote. "I can handle my own farm," she said, voice hard. "I know you can," I said, turning to face her, "but you're paying me for a week. Might as well get your money's worth while the glue dries." She searched my face for mockery. When she didn't find it, her shoulders dropped a fraction. "Just don't break anything," she said, and walked away. But she didn't tell me to stop. By day 4, we'd fallen into a dangerous kind of routine. The repair was ahead of schedule. The 1-week deadline was still looming, but the pressure had changed shape. I could have shut the barn doors and called it a day. Instead, I wiped pitch off a chisel that was already clean, spun my wrench on the same carriage bolt a third time until the washer sang, and coiled the extension cord slow enough to hear Hadley's boots crossing the loft while she sorted bruised apples into neat rows below. That afternoon, the rain finally quit. The clouds tore open and the orchard yard turned soft and bright. Hadley sat on the same flatbed trailer I'd first seen her on, catching her breath. One knee up, plaid shirt knotted at the waist, white tank under it. She wiped grime off her palm and stared at the barn like she was counting the days left in her life. I walked up in my gray t-shirt, dust on my hands, and stopped a few feet away, close enough to talk, far enough to give her space. "You always sit there when you're deciding something," I said. "It's the only place I can see everything," she answered, eyes on the fence line. "The barn, the orchard, the house. If I stop looking, it feels like it disappears." "It won't," I said. She finally looked at me, really looked. "Kingsley left something," she said, reaching into her back pocket and pulling out an envelope. "His offer." She handed it over. Inside were printed terms on heavy paper, a deed transfer, a deadline, a line about taking possession immediately upon signature. It wasn't a business deal, it was a choke collar. I tapped the page with my finger. "He's not buying land, he's buying leverage." "I know," she said, voice flat, "and the bank won't give me another week. The loan officer already told me it's Monday, and the note accelerates." There it was, the real reason she couldn't just leave or wait for help. She exhaled, and her hand went to her left temple. 1, 2, 3 rubs. A nervous tick, counting losses. I folded the papers and handed them back. "Keep it." "Evidence," she said, raising an eyebrow. "Evidence for what?" she asked. "For when he crosses the line," I said. "Men like him always do." Her gaze flicked to my mouth for half a second, then back to my eyes. Not shy, not helpless, just a woman deciding whether to trust a man who didn't belong here. I changed the subject before it got soft. "Your coffee thermos was empty," I said. I refilled it. "Real coffee," her expression cracked. A laugh, small, genuine, escaped. "Why are you being nice to me, Braylon?" she asked. "I'm not nice," I said. "I'm practical. A tired client makes bad decisions." "That is the worst excuse I've ever heard," she said, eyes warming. "But thank you." That one sentence hit harder than any flirt. The twist came Friday afternoon. I was up in the rafters applying the final sealant to the splice. Feeling good. I was going to finish on time. I was going to win the bet, even though I didn't want to win anymore. Then I saw it. A dark stain near a joint on the north side. I poked it with my awl. The tip sank in 2 inches. Soft, punky rot. Hidden, dry rot. Under old whitewash. The kind that looks harmless until it takes a roof with it. The storm hadn't just snapped the ridge beam. It had shifted the load onto this secondary system, and this secondary system was basically sponge cake. I pulled a moisture meter from my pouch and pressed the pins into the timber. The number jumped. I took a pocket knife and shaved a sliver away. The wood crumbled like stale bread. I snapped 2 photos with my phone, zoomed in on the reading, then climbed down. Hadley was in the doorway with a clipboard. She looked hopeful for the first time all week. "Almost done," she asked. I could have patched it. I could have ignored it. It would hold for a month, maybe 2. I could take the check and leave. That's what a contractor does. "We have a problem," I said. I walked her to the post, showed her the damage, the reading, the photos. "If we get heavy snow or high winds, this whole north section collapses," I said. "I can't sign off on the repair like this." Her face went pale. "What does that mean?" she asked. "It means we shore up the north wall, new bracing timber, steel, more time." "How much time?" 3 days minimum. Maybe 4. The clipboard slipped from her fingers and clattered on the concrete. "The freeze is Sunday night," she said, voice breaking. "If the barn isn't sealed, the apples freeze. They turn to mush. I lose the contract." "I can work nights," I said. "I can rig lights. I can fabricate temporary sheathing and lock the load path." "I can't afford you for 4 more days," she snapped. "I can't afford the materials." "Forget the money," I said. "No," she stepped back like I'd insulted her. "I am not a charity case. I am not some woman you rescue so you can feel good about yourself. If I can't pay, you don't work." Quote. "Hadley, listen." "Pack your tools, Brillin," she said, voice shaking. "You did what I hired you for. The ridge is fixed. Leave the rot. I'll figure it out." "Figure it out?" I said, staring at her in disbelief. "The roof will kill you. That's my problem. Just go." She turned and ran out. I stood there, furious. I kicked a bucket across the floor. It slammed into the wall with a clang that echoed through the rafters. I packed my truck. My knuckles went white on the steering wheel. I slammed the truck into gear hard enough to feel it in my teeth. The engine barked a low animal sound, like it wanted a target. I sat in the cab, engine idling. The sun was setting, throwing long shadows over the orchard. I should drive away. Next job's in Tennessee. Warm there. I looked at the barn. I thought about her hand shaking around a coffee cup. I thought about her catching my belt when I almost fell 30 feet. I turned the engine off. I got out and walked to the farmhouse. I didn't knock. I found her on the porch swing, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the driveway like she was waiting for abandonment to become official. "You're still here?" she said, not looking at me. "I'm not leaving," I said. "I told you." "I don't care what you told me." I stepped onto the porch and stopped in front of her, blocking her view of the road and whatever Kingsley Cox thought he owned. "I'm not doing it for the money," I said. "I'm doing it because I don't leave a job half-finished, and I don't leave people unsafe." Her eyes lifted, wet. "Why do you care?" she whispered. "You're just passing through. That's who you are, the hotshot who fixes it and leaves." My jaw tightened. I kept my voice steady. "Maybe I'm tired of leaving," I said, "and maybe I don't like watching a bully circle someone who's already bleeding." She stood. The blanket slid off her shoulders. "Breland," she said, voice thin. "I can't ask you to stay," she whispered. "You don't have to ask," I said. "I'm staying." I moved in slow, gave her every chance to step back. She didn't. She stepped closer instead. I cupped her jaw with my hand, rough thumb against her cheek, and kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't sloppy. It was the kind of kiss that says, "I'm here, and I'm not letting go." She answered it. Both hands grabbed my jacket, pulling me down like she'd made her decision and didn't plan to apologize for it. I broke away just enough to breathe. "I'm fixing the north wall," I said, forehead to hers. "Start the coffee." She nodded once. A small, unmistakable yes. The freeze came early. Of course it did. Saturday noon, the sky turned bruised purple, and the temperature dropped 20 degrees in an hour. The wind started screaming through the valley like it was angry. We were still standing. We weren't just repairing. We were engineering under a deadline. I dragged my portable generator out of the trailer and ran extension cords through the barn. I hung work lights from the rafters, then strung a line of heavy tarps outside the north wall like a temporary skin. Come along ratchet straps and a chain fall, everything I had. Hadley moved with me like a second set of hands. "Tell me the next step," she said. "We're changing the load path," I said, pointing. "This rot can't carry weight, so we bypass it. We tie the roof to a new brace and send the force down into sound timber." She swallowed, eyes tracking the structure like she was learning a new language. "And if we don't," she asked, "then the wind finds the weak spot and peels the roof like a sardine can." She didn't argue after that. By mid-afternoon, I had temporary supports in place, but I needed to through-bolt the new bracing timber into the sound section before the wind load tore the whole quadrant off. "Drill!" I yelled over the roar. Hadley slapped the auger into my hand. She was right there beside me on the lift, hair whipping, knuckles white on the railing. "Wind speed is hitting 50, she shouted, checking her phone. "The siding is rattling. It'll hold." I wasn't lying. I believed it. It was a command. I drove the bit through. The torque kicked back, twisting my wrist. Pain flared, but I didn't let go. Crack! A slate tile ripped off the roof and smashed onto the hood of my truck below. Hadley flinched. "Brylan, it's too dangerous." She grabbed my forearm. "We have to get down." Her grip was real protective. I looked at her, then at the bolt hole. "One more," I said. "It's not worth your life." "It is," I said, voice low, controlled. "Because it's yours." She froze. Then she did something that mattered. She didn't yank me away. She stayed. Her hand slid from my arm to the back of my belt, anchoring me the way she had on the scaffolding. "Then do it," she said, eyes locked on mine. "But do it right." That was consent without softness, mutual, clear. I turned back, drove the bolt home, then cranked the nut until the steel bit into the pine. The structure groaned, settled, and held. The vibration under our boots stopped. The wall was locked. I slumped against the brace, breathing hard. "Done! It's done!" Hadley stared at the bolt and then at me. Her fingers touched my cheek, brushing sawdust like she was checking I was real. "You're out of your mind," she breathed. "Maybe," I said, "but you did it." Her voice turned quiet. Awe, relief, respect. We were in it now. Sunday morning broke clear and cold. The ground was white with frost, hard as iron. But inside the barn, the temperature held just above freezing. The apples were safe. Kingsley Cox showed up at 9 a.m., like a man arriving to collect what he'd already bought. The same polished scent rode with him, clean and sharp, drifting over the sour apple rot like an insult. He expected a ruin. Instead, he found a straight roof line and fresh bracing timber that looked like it had always belonged. Hadley walked out to meet him. Not behind me, not hiding, straight-backed, hands steady. I stayed by the barn door, one shoulder on the post, watching. Kingsley held a folder. "I brought the documents," he said, smiling like a priest offering forgiveness. Last chance to be reasonable. "The harvest is secure," Hadley said, voice carrying in the crisp air. "I'll have the bank payment tomorrow." His smile faltered. He looked at the barn, then at me in the shadows. "You spent a fortune on a patch job," he sneered at her. "You're delaying the inevitable." "I'm investing in the future," she said, "and I'm not selling. Not today. Not ever. Get off my land." Kingsley stepped closer. Too close. "You can't outwork math, Hadley," he murmured. "You miss one payment, and the whole thing is mine." "Don't make me make calls." I moved. I didn't touch him. I just closed the distance and stood between him and her like a door that wouldn't open. "You've already made your calls," I said calmly. "And you did it on a recorded timeline. She has your offer in writing, dated. She has your threats from Friday with a witness. You want to keep talking? We can do it with the sheriff on speaker." Kingsley's eyes narrowed. Hadley's chin lifted. "Leave," she said. For a second, Cox looked like he might explode. Then he smiled again. Thin this time, and backed away. "Enjoy your little victory," he said. "Storms come back." "So do I," I replied. He drove off. Hadley exhaled slowly, the fight draining out of her. "You okay?" I asked. She turned to me, and something softened without collapsing. "I owe you," she said. "I don't know how I'm going to pay you for the extra days." "I'll send a bill," I said. "You can pay it in installments, 10 years. "I don't care." She looked toward the trailer. "So you're done?" she asked. "Yeah." The word tasted like ash. "I fixed it." "I guess you need to get to Tennessee," she said. "I guess so." We stood there, the bet hanging between us like a wire. I waited for her to ask. She didn't. Her mouth tightened like she was holding back 100 things at once. "Okay," she said quietly. "Safe travels, Breland." She turned and started walking toward the house. My hand hovered over the gear shift. My foot held on the brake a beat too long. I ignored it. I finished packing the truck, hooked up the trailer. The engine rumbled. I drove down the long gravel driveway. At the main road, Tennessee was left. Right was nowhere. I hit the brakes. The trailer skidded. I put it in reverse and backed up the driveway. Gravel spraying. I parked right where I'd been for 10 days. I got out and marched to the farmhouse. Hadley was in the kitchen, staring into a coffee cup like it had all the answers. She jumped when I walked in. "You forgot something?" she asked, voice tight. "Yeah," I said. "I forgot to collect on the bet." Her eyes widened. "What?" I pulled a folded piece of paper from my pocket. It wasn't an invoice. It was a sketch I'd made the night before, a timber frame porch edition for the farmhouse. A permanent build. I flattened it on the table. "I'm staying," I said. "I've got work to do here. The porch needs rebuilding. The fencing is rot. And the owner needs someone to make sure she drinks her coffee before she burns herself out." Hadley stared at the sketch, then she looked up. Tears spilled over, but she didn't wipe them like she was ashamed. "You can't just decide to stay," she said, half laughing, half breathing. "Watch me," I said. My jaw tightened, calm, certain. "Where will you sleep?" she asked. "That trailer is freezing." "The trailer," I said. "Until you invite me in, I can wait." Quote. She came around the table and stopped close enough that I could feel her warmth. "Shut up, Foster," she said, grabbing my shirt and pulling me down. The kiss she gave me wasn't desperate. It was a claim. When she pulled back, her eyes were steady. "Bring your bag inside," she said. I grinned. "Is that an invite?" "It's a demand," she nodded toward the hall. "And you're going to eat something that isn't trailer food. You know, we spend so much time building walls to protect ourselves. Like Hadley protecting her legacy or me protecting my ego. But true strength isn't about handling everything alone. It's about knowing when to let someone else hold the ladder. Resilience isn't just surviving the storm. It's being brave enough to rebuild the roof together after it passes." The morning after the storm passed, everything felt different. The sun was low, casting golden light across the orchard. It wasn't just the warmth, but the air felt lighter somehow. Less tense. Less like we were both balancing on the edge of a cliff. I spent most of the morning cleaning up. The barn was holding strong now, better than it had in years. The old, weathered timber stood solid and proud once again. But Hadley, she was different too. There was something different about the way she moved around the farm now. Like she finally wasn't carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders anymore. We didn't talk much that morning. But every time I caught her looking at me, there was something unspoken in her gaze, something I hadn't seen before. I wasn't just the guy who fixed barns anymore. I was more. I was here. By late afternoon, I had finished up the repairs, and the barn was as ready as it could be before the freeze. We both stood outside, leaning against the airstream, taking in the view of the orchard. The wind had finally calmed, and the temperature had dropped enough to give the air that crisp bite of winter. I turned to Hadley, watching her for a second as she glanced back at me. "You really did it," she said, the smile finally reaching her eyes. I wiped a hand over my face, feeling the weight of everything lifting off my chest. "I told you I would." Quote. She laughed, but it was soft. "You didn't have to stay." "I know," I said, my voice softer than I meant it to be, but I didn't leave. She didn't reply right away. Instead, she took a deep breath and stepped closer to me, her face serious now. "You could have walked away, Brillin. Everything would have been easier if you had, but you didn't. You chose to stay." I nodded slowly, the reality of it settling in. Guess I did. And for the first time in a long time, I realized I didn't need an excuse for doing it. I just wanted to. I just needed to be here, with her. Her expression softened, and she reached out to touch my arm lightly. There was a vulnerability in her eyes, a softness that made my chest tighten. "I'm not used to people staying, you know," she said quietly. "Not for the long haul. Everyone always leaves." "I'm not going anywhere," I told her. "Not unless you tell me to." Quote. Her lips parted, like she wanted to say something, but she stopped herself, and for a long moment we just stood there, watching the trees in the distance bend with the wind, feeling the calm after the chaos. And that's when I knew she didn't need to say it. I knew it by the way she looked at me, by the way we moved together, We weren't fixing barns anymore, we were fixing each other. "I'm staying," I said again, more certain this time. She smiled then, small but real. "Well, I guess you're right about one thing." "What's that?" I asked, leaning in a little. She raised an eyebrow, teasing but warm. "Bet you will ask me to stay longer." I grinned, the knot in my chest loosening completely. "You lost, remember?" Her eyes met mine, and for a brief, shining moment there was no hesitation. No walls between us, just something real, something solid. "I'll take that bet," she said, and I kissed her again. This time, slow, like we had all the time in the world. Because we did. We had all the time we wanted now. And when the storm had passed, it wasn't just the roof that was stronger. We were too, together.